Welcome back, everybody. This is Dr. Diabolical, and we're out here at the Colorado test facility today with Smaug. In the last episode, I talked a little bit about some of Smaug's shortcomings, and we're going to take a look now, in depth, at some of his problems, some of his strengths, and what we want to try to accomplish with this project. Now, this is Smaug's head, and you can see it's a lot bigger than what it appears at first. This is Smaug's eye, and these are plastic taillight lenses, usually found on trailers. They are 12 volt and they do light up when I flip the switch. Smaug's head itself is made out of plywood, and it's held together on the edges with what I believe were metal flashing strips intended for use in roofing. Lots of little screws, but a very basic design. Teeth on the lower jaw are indeed made out of sheet metal, and the topper just cuts into plywood. Smaug's head has this rather odd trapezoidal design. When I originally conceived it, I was thinking it was going to be about the size of a mailbox. As you can see, it is considerably larger than that. In fact, I think it measures about 3 feet from nose to the top of his head. Second problem with Smaug is that he's rather two-dimensional. When I first built him, I made him out of the materials I had on hand, and he wasn't actually conceived to be a dragon in the first place. He was intended to be a dinosaur. I built him for a single-day event, one parade that lasted about 45 minutes. So I didn't put a whole lot of thought or a whole lot of serious effort into designing his neck. I just wanted to get something together that represented a dinosaur and get him into the parade. Afterwards, I added the gusset plates, and they do add a little bit of visual weight to him. And you can see that although they appear to be riveted on, they're actually not. These are just pieces of thin plywood, and the rivets themselves are thumbtacks. It's amazing what you can do with flat black paint. Smaug's hinges are regular door hinges. Actually, I believe cabinet hinges. Not terribly strong. And he does have these rather heavy looking sort of support rods. They keep his neck from flopping from side to side, and they're essential in keeping him together. This is something that we will have to incorporate into the new neck design, but I'm not exactly sure what the shape is going to be yet. The one thing I am certain about is that the dimensions of his neck, the actual structural members, are going to be about 2 inches. Now, these gusset plates are 2 inches, and I think if we square up his neck, instead of just having a single two-dimensional shape, that it'll add a whole lot more visual weight to him. Smaug's neck's connected to his frame with just some 1/2-inch bolts, and they do an adequate job, but I think if we're going to have him moving and have his neck actuated, that we're going to need a better connection than that. Maybe some heavy heim joints here, probably 1/2 or 3/4 inch. That will allow for any misalignment that he might encounter if his frame is flexing as he travels. Right now I have him actuated with a simple 2,500 pound hand cranked winch. Now, sometimes I run this winch if I'm not going to have his neck moving. Other times I'll borrow a 2,500 pound electric winch off of the Kraken. And that's what you saw in the last video. It's remote controlled, and it allows me to raise and lower Smaug's neck by pushing a button. I really like that design, but I think what I want to do in the future is move away from the sort of garage level technology of an electric winch and install a proper linear actuator. Now, you've noticed one of Smaug's primary features. He has very large wheels. These wheels measure 59 3/4 inches, With the tires, they're just over 60 inches. Now everybody asks me, Dr. Diabolical, you've got tires on Smaug. Where did you get 60-inch tires? And the answer is, I didn't. These are mountain bike tires. You can see from the detail, I cut the bead out of them and simply attached them by sticking them on and stapling them down. Now somewhere in here is a seam, because of course even a mountain bike tire does not stretch out to be 60 inches, and there it is right there. This is Smaug's braking system and also his gear shift. He does use a knob type shifter and just a simple actuator to a cross shaft and a pair of wagon brakes. When the lever is pulled, Smaug's brakes simply rub on the tires. It is effective, but it's not as good as it could be. And I think with the additional weight we'll be adding to Smaug going forward, we're going to have to look at some better brakes for him. Maybe some automotive brakes, maybe something attached to his axles. Smaug's drivetrain is interesting, and it's quite involved. So, we'll take you through it here. Of course, these are just regular mountain bike pedals. Triple chain ring, just like you'd find on any cheap mountain bike. Chain runs down to a regular freewheel. This happens to be a Shimano Mega Range. That outside cog is 34 teeth, the inside is 14. Standard derailleur. I did have to notch out the chainstay for clearance, otherwise the chain would rub. But so far, this is just a basic mountain bike setup. Now here's where it gets into. Smog's rear hub is custom made. Now what you're seeing is a regular mountain bike rear hub with a tube welded across the flanges. I did have to machine that on a lathe, and I did have a friend TIG weld it up for me. I probably could have done it with the arc welder, but TIG was better, so I had him do it for me. Now on the left side, it does have a 14-tooth sprocket. This was salvaged off of a freewheel. It's been machined out to fit, and it's been welded in place. It is fixed, and it turns this chain assembly here up to another set of chain wheels. These chain wheels are standard mountain bike parts, and they do go across the standard mountain bike bottom bracket. Now from the second bottom bracket, we come across to another custom part. This is a number 40 sprocket. It's what's known as a Weld-A-Sprocket. It comes as just a flat plate, and for those of you that are technical enough to know what I'm saying, I believe this is a Type A sprocket. Now it's welded onto a machined fitting that I made by cutting off a steel crank arm off of a cheap mountain bike, dropping it into the lathe and machining it until it was the right diameter to fit inside the Weld-A-Sprocket. We follow this down on our final drive, which is number 40 agricultural chain, through our tensioner. This is an idler pulley, or rather an idler sprocket, down to our big number 42 that's connected to our axle. Now in the first video I mentioned that Smaug weighed about 450 pounds. It was actually incorrect. I put him on the scale this morning, and he came in at 703. There's quite a bit of equipment that he normally runs in full parade mode that is not attached to him right now, like a compressed air tank, a rather large RV battery, a toolbox, a few other bits and pieces, including a stereo system, which we'll see later. But with all of that equipment and ready to roll in a parade, the actual weight was 703.5 pounds. And the only source of power is me, and sometimes a friend. Now you're asking yourself, Dr. Diabolical, how is it possible that you're pedaling something as heavy as a Harley-Davidson motorcycle, especially when you're going uphill? And the answer is all of these gears. Low gear in Smaug is 14.8 to 1. Smaug has two separate drivetrains. They're independent of each other. Each rider can choose their own gear. Each rider can coast if they choose. They can pedal as fast or as slow as they want. And they're not rigidly connected to the other rider. So if I'm grinding up a hill, the other rider can coast. And when we reach the flats, she can take over and I can rest. This is very useful in a parade, when you have to maintain a constant speed, or a relatively constant speed, and you must keep moving forward. If your legs are completely burned out, you've always got a backup. Another question you're probably asking yourself is, how do you climb up on that thing? Now this is Smaug's steering system. He does have a steering wheel. It's made out of an old bike rim and part of a handlebar and some conduit and part of an old bicycle. It's a rather simple system. It uses this bell crank attached to the steering levers. That's made out of an old bicycle. And everything is connected together with a little piece of steel cable. Now this system does work, and the person who designed it and whom I borrowed it from told me that, yeah, it's all you really need. And he was correct. It is all you really need if you're going to be riding an event that only lasts about one day, and you don't mind it breaking about 10 times during that day. I've never been completely pleased with Smog's steering system. Sometimes it binds up. Sometimes it slips. Sometimes it works great, and sometimes it doesn't work at all. It's never been terribly reliable. And so I'm experimenting with something new. This is a bell crank and steering lever system. Extremely simple. Just a long lever, nice long rod, and a connection point. I want to stress that this is just an experiment. Just a proof of concept. If I decide to use this system, I will certainly be making it out of better materials, and it will be better engineered. It'll also have better ergonomics, and it'll have proper hardware instead of this packed together mess. Now Smaug's rear wheel is an interesting story. It too is repurposed. This was originally the front wheel off of a 1974 Yamaha motorcycle. I don't know exactly which model, but the guy I bought it from cut the front end off with a plasma cutter and said, give me $100. So this is the one I chose. It does have a working drum brake, although I don't have any attachment to it yet. It needs to have a proper cable, and I don't have any cables that will work with a motorcycle brake at this time. That's something that we'll have to look at. This is Smaug's tail. Smog's tail is hinged in 3 places. But that's not so that it can move during parades. That's so that it can fold up to fit inside of his trailer. If Smog Seats look like something left over from that last convention you attended in Orlando, they might have been. They're repurposed. I bought these, I think, at one of the office supply stores, cut the legs off, attached a little bit of steel to the bottom, and that's about it. They're connected to his frame with a pair of U-bolts, which does make the seats adjustable, so they can slide forwards or backwards to adjust to reach the pedals. Looking at Smog's lower third, you'll see he does have a cow catcher and some skirting in the back. This is plastic poultry netting and a little bit of paracord on top of 1/2 inch, maybe 3/4 inch conduit that's been formed to give the basic idea of the cow catcher. Moving forward, I'd like to utilize this space a little better. I'd like to box in the lower third of Smaug, add in a plywood floor, and attach all of his running gear and heavy equipment down here. One thing that'll do is it will allow me to hide all of the equipment that I don't want people to see during a parade. It'll also give me a place to put it instead of strapping it up on top where it would be in the way. Now, I mentioned in the last video that Smaug did have to hinge and fold up in order to fit in his trailer. And here we're looking at the other side of the hinges. They're held together with bolts and pins, which means that each time I set up Smaug, I need tools. That's not a real good design. I like him to hinge without tools, so that he's easy to set up and even easier to take apart. One of the major problems with parade floats is that when the parade's over, the organizers want him gone. That means that we need to pack up Smaug in a hurry, get him back in his trailer, and get out of there. Having to use tools to take Smaug apart means that it's slower, and it's just a few more things I have to take with me. We'll look at a different design when we redesign his neck to make a toolless hinge. Also, in the future, this may be actuated with a linear actuator so that Smaug can move the upper part of his neck, not only side to side, but also forward and backward, giving him 3-axis movement at this joint. Now, we talked about this earlier, but here it is again. Smaug's neck being fixed, his nose always points at the ground when his neck is in the horizontal position. And it needs to be in this horizontal position if I'm going to get him in the trailer. If I raise up his neck any higher than this, it'll hit the roof of the trailer when I enter it. And if I drop his neck down any lower, his nose will hit the ramp of the trailer and keep him from rolling inside. We need to work on this. See what's involved in folding up Smaug's tail. We have this hinge here, and the last third of his tail hinges back onto itself. That's really nice, but it's something we're going to have to change because we are going to make his tail more three-dimensional, and that'll mean we'll need to account for the fact that his tail is going to be thicker than it is now. Second hinge in his tail allows this part to turn 90 degrees. Again, we'll have to think about how to hinge that properly once he's three-dimensional. The third joint up top here allows the entire assembly to swing over onto his left-hand side. Now, you'll recall from the last video, Smaug with his canopy in the up position is simply too tall to fit inside of his trailer. So how do we make him fit? Well, Smaug's canopy has 4 large steel supports, and the front 2 are joined together with a cross shaft. This keeps the orientation correct and allows his canopy to simply fold down like a giant parallelogram. And now he's short enough to fit inside, except for that pesky neck. If Smaug could tilt his head up, we might be able to tuck it in on his right-hand side. But his neck will have to be in a lower position. We'll have to work on those geometries to make sure that everything fits. Packaging is always a problem with Smaug. In the next episode, we'll start tearing Smaug apart, and we'll start experimenting with that new lever steering system. Thanks for watching.